Just have the web browser open up, please. Or whatever you need to.
Yes,
pull
I'm
up.
gonna, yeah, I'm gonna not do.
Okay, you're all set.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
How are you? How's everybody?
Fantastic.
Brand new to the business? Brand new, brand new?
And then
So what'd you do before?
I was a supervisor at 911.
Oh,
for 15
really?
years. Mhm.
I've got a client who's building, or he's on the commission to build a 911 facility in Mount Vernon, Lawrence County.
Okay, yeah,
James Carson.
not familiar. I was here in Springfield, Green County 911
How
Center.
many hours each day? 8
10
hours?
10,
10?
sometimes 12.
And then right at your desk, or did you go lunch, or
Nope, at my desk.
did it
20-minute
ever stop?
breaks. No.
What's the weirdest one you ever had?
Oh. Probably what my idea of weird and your idea of weird might be two different things. Well, I would say some of the weirdest calls I've had were the ones that were hallucinating on some type of drugs.
yeah.
We always had, bugs in the floors, computer chips.
Yeah.
A guy thought the FBI was after him. And I did have a guy call one time. He was over at Nathaniel Green Park about 2 o'clock in the morning. He could smell pit bull puppies.
That's a skill.
Well, things are stressful. Just grab a contract over there
Okay.
and grab all 3 if you can, and come up close if you can too. Second row would be good. This gets stressful at times. Real estate does.
Yeah,
But
it's,
I don't know if you, the team meeting this morning or not with Lucas Grable, he's talking about the ups and downs. You have ups and downs, but hell, you have ups and downs in
Everything.
life.
everything.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
I always just, my wife calls me a Pollyanna. I always think everything's good, so it doesn't matter. It's not, I know, but I always think there's gotta be a way we can work this out, which
Right.
is a great way to approach real estate.
Right,
Don't freak out when the inspection report comes in. Don't freak out when the inspection notice comes in. Don't freak out when you have to show, not now probably, but 6 months ago, 13 properties before you can get an offer accepted.
Mhm.
Things are back to normal to some degree now. So even though it's stressful, it's not that kind of stress.
correct. Well, and Elise Riley I'm on her team.
Oh, yeah.
So she was in law enforcement before.
She's seen it all too.
Yeah, and so it's just kind of nice to be able to, which is what she has talked me into, is serving people in a more positive way.
Yeah, this is serving people too, and I think people remember that. But it doesn't matter what it is, whether you're selling a home, buying a home, selling land, buying land, selling commercial, buying commercial. It doesn't matter what it is. You're still helping people achieve their dreams, one way or the other. It doesn't matter which side you're on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is a lot better than what you were in, where people dial 911 or 988 now. Because of stress. There's
Yeah.
something going on in their life that they can't handle, whatever it might be, and it might
Their
be.
worst day.
I lost my cat, send the police, those kind of things, Yeah, I get it. Well, this will be a piece of cake compared to that. What'd you do?
I worked at Chase Bank.
Oh, you did?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a pretty good company to work for though, isn't it?
Yeah, I enjoyed a lot of aspects of it. I didn't see much opportunity for advancement, and I was trying to break away from the 9 to 5. Or in that case, it was 4:45 to 1:15 in the morning. And I was just trying to be at home with the kids more and trying to create my own schedule, start my own business. So real estate seemed like the proper idea to go to.
I taught school for 10 years, and I had a fairly good schedule. except I coached, so maybe not so good a schedule, you know? But anyhow, it wasn't bad. But I always had to work in the summers to make ends meet. So when I got into real estate, I realized right away, and you should too, this is one of the things you need to keep in your mind. If you have an appointment with your family, it's just the same as an appointment with a client. And people call me all the time. Even when I first started, I figured that out. And they'd say, I got to look at this house over on, E76 right now. I can't do it, man. I said, I've got an appointment. And it might be going to pick up my kids from school or read in their class or coach a girls softball team or something of that nature. But when I was in real estate, I never cared. I didn't care. And if they wanted to go use somebody else, I didn't care about that either. Because I felt like that appointment was more important than their appointment.
Yeah.
And, of course, I have to eat and all that. So you have to generate business. But I give them other options. Say, I can do it at 7:30 tonight, or I can do it tomorrow before noon, but I can't do it right now, not this moment. And in Branson, hell, pardon my language, I do slip out of it. Back then, when we took listings, we took them for a year, everything, residential, everything, because it took forever to sell. And that was in the late 90s. I had listings that had birthdays all the time, decide, am I going to keep it or get rid of it? And where you guys are struggling for listings, when I left Branson in whenever it was, 98, 99, I had 101 listings.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. I needed every one of them too. I mean, it was that kind of market.
Yeah.
You needed to have an abundance of listings. And back then, the difference is, and of course, it's harder now, but like I decided at one time, I'm going to get every listing between 80 and 100,000 in the Branson School District. So then I knew that if anybody was out looking for a house between 80 and 100, they were going to have to show one of mine. You know what I mean? I mean, now it's different now. You can't, it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply. And their quality, there were good realtors, but there were fewer realtors. There might have been as many properties because Branson's always turning over, but there were fewer good realtors. I mean, people that really worked at it every day, had a plan, the KW type of plan where you step by step, you're doing this, so it was a lot easier for me. I'd been, after teaching, I'd gone into business for 10 years. So, I knew that to run a business, you've got to get up every morning, go to work every day. And, you may have to stay late. You're going to do it. So what's your background?
Security.
Really? With a gun or a taser or just?
No, I was unarmed. But kind of similar to her calls too. I took some of those as well as a dispatcher, and
How long did you do it?
about 10 years,
Oh my gosh.
something like that. So now I'm helping my boyfriend with his business and everything. So
What does he do?
he started a plumbing business.
Oh, cool.
And so
That's one of the best businesses in the world. Because when you need a plumber, by God, you need a plumber.
yeah. So, and that's why
Oh,
that's the way I am. I'm just like, everyone stay away from me because I probably smell like sweat and everything.
It's the one thing that men and women, I guess, I should make sure I get my pronouns right here, but should not attempt at home is plumbing. I don't care if it's just putting this faucet in. I see it all the time on TV, Home Depot, where somebody advertises somebody putting a faucet in. It's not that easy. Number one, you're laying on your back.
Mhm.
There's all kinds of things that can go wrong in between here and there. It's not just screw this in. It's a lot harder.
Oh, he's doing all the hard work. He's underneath the house the last few days. And I do everything else.
Yeah.
All the run around admin stuff.
Have you got somebody to help him?
No, it's just him. Well, I mean, I help him whenever I
So
can.
one thing with
But
plumbing is it's always good to have a helper because you are under a house sometimes,
Mhm.
or you're under a sink. So if you need one specific tool.
yeah,
then you
and I
gotta
do
get
that.
out,
I do that for him.
Go 200 yards to the truck,
Mhm.
grab it, come back. It was 9/16. It's kind of-
Yeah, he's doing that and gonna get his inspector's license, and I want to go into real estate, so we're kind of
Yeah,
intertwined and together in a way.
yeah.
So,
The inspector license and inspection and realtors, we had 2, I think, that have done that. I think they're still active. You just have to be careful with that,
mhm,
that if the only inspector you ever recommend is your husband,
mhm.
that can be a bad deal.
Oh, it's a horrible deal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You want to give everybody a choice and everything. So that's the same thing in whether it be a lender or whatever it might be, but lenders and inspectors especially, you've got to make sure you give multiple choices. Now,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
probably still going to depend on you and title companies. They're going to depend on you to make a choice. But if we looked at 10-year contracts and 10-year contracts all had, what's your husband's name?
AJ.
AJ as the inspector, it'd be like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? We've got one realtor, and I won't give her name, but her husband's an inspector, and I bet 90% of her inspections are by him.
I mean,
It just
it's
doesn't happen.
cheaper in the long run, but it's conflict of interest
Oh, yeah.
and, you know,
Yeah,
it's just,
a real conflict. of
and
interest.
he does a lot of things for veterans too. So since he's
Oh,
one,
that'll help.
so, yeah.
The E&O on that would be bad.
Mhm.
E&O is the insurance errors and omissions. So what's your claim to fame before you got here?
International logistics and transportation.
What was that?
International logistics and transportation. I imported, exported, customs brokerage. So
You
anything
know,
in and out of the country.
oh gosh, can't think of his name. His father-in-law does that. Lives out on Farm Road 223, I think. Can't think of his name. But that's what he does. I mean, he does containers. He's got,
Yeah, I do ocean freight and air freight.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what he does. Do you live in a $2 million house like his dad does?
No, I do not.
He does. He lives in a, it's really funny. So I listed his 40 acres out east of town. The lady wants $1 million for it. I said, she's crazy, you know. She is crazier than hell. You never get that, you know. She goes, well, that's what I want to list it for. I said, I'll list it. I'm not going to list it there. She said, well, list it for $950. And I say, okay, we'll list it for $950, you know. What the heck? It's basically vacant land. It's got an old house on it, but doesn't have heat, air, or electricity. Just a hayfield. And I say, I'm just put 2 signs on it. I don't have to have open houses. I don't, you know, if someone wants to see it, I'll just drive out there and drive around the field in my truck. No big deal. Anyhow, the next day I go to my daughter's house and she has a pool and they're flopping around the pool and I'm sitting there in the shade. And I get a phone call and this guy goes, hey, you know, that property just listed out there. She said, I'm writing an offer on it. I'm like, great, you know, it's great property, you know. It says be an offer right then for $800,000. I'm thinking, jeez. So I called her immediately. She's 89 years old. And I say, you know what? It's a great offer. You ought to take it. You know what she said? No, I'm not taking that. What's his name anyway? And I said, he prefers to keep his name private until you accept the offer. It's an international company. That's all. That's the only information I have, which happens sometimes on big properties like that. She said, I'll think about it, but I'm countering. And I said, okay, we can counter it. $945. And so 45 minutes later, this guy calls me and goes, hey, I'm writing an offer on that property out there that you listed out in East Rogers. I'm like, kidding, how much? $825. I said, send it over, I'll present it to her. I said, we've already got one offer, so you know you have to be above 800,000. So he does. Anyhow, it's a local family here, and I'll keep their name off. But anyhow, she didn't like him. So I sent it to her and she goes, is that blah, blah, blah? And I go, yeah. She said, well, you know, he lives right beside that property. I said, yeah, I know that. Said, I ain't selling it to him. Oh, good God, it's $825,000 for 40 acres. So anyhow, we ended up countering back and forth. She took the guy, but the guy lived directly across the property from her. And he lived in a house that I don't, you know, I've never been in it, but it's gated and all of this, and it's on 40 acres, and it's at least $2 million. And then there's 2 driveways that go around it. He's got one daughter living in one, it's a $500,000 house, and the other daughter living in the other one's $500,000 house. He just didn't want anybody building there.
Yeah.
Put a bunch of houses in there, and so he gave $845,000 for it.
It's crazy.
Wow.
And I'm like, I mean, it's just shocking to me. It's just like,
When was that?
just last year,
Oh my God.
21. Yeah, this is the dangest thing I've seen. And I mean, I did nothing, put 2 signs out there. So one of the things I would tell you, if you ever get an opportunity to list land, list it. So, because you don't have to do the open houses. I mean, you've got to try to market it and sell it, but nobody's going to call you in the middle of the day and say, hey, will you show me that land? There's a whole different approach to land. they'll look around, you know, they'll want you to show it to them, but it won't be like a house.
So I have a question on that. So I just had 20 acres in Buffalo that I listed
Yeah.
for $100,000,
How much?
100,000. So I've got a bunch of calls on it. Somebody offered me like 80 on it, but nothing yet. And it's only been on the market like a week. I'm thinking just let it be.
Oh, yeah, 5,000 an acre? I mean, is it, it's
Got a
not,
bond on it?
it's
No.
not like this
No.
because it's in Buffalo, so it's a prairie land.
No.
Probably, does it have trees?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's like,
Ponds?
yeah, it has one pond, 2 or 3 of the acres are wooded, but it's overgrown bad right now.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just don't do anything with it.
Yep.
It'll sell it somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 an
Uh-huh.
acre.
That's what I was.
Yeah, because that's a good size.
It is 20 acres and
So
the.
you can tell the next person that calls, say, well, you know what? If this was in East Rogersville, it'd be 800,000.
Okay, all
Just
right.
write the check. Don't you guys counter on that?
No, yeah, at 90 and they said they weren't.
Leave it out there.
Yep.
I just follow up with a phone call pretty soon.
I-
What's your background before this? I know
Um,
already, but
Mortgage, actually, but financial services altogether, taxes, accounting, payroll.
he's got a background that kind of fits into this too. I mean, anytime that you can do numbers, it helps. But I will tell you, you learned at school, real estate school, that you had to do all this proration of this and proration of that and interest rate and all that. You don't have to do any of that. You don't do any of it. Don't even think about doing any of it. So no matter what they told you in school, it was a lie. It was just, that's the biggest thing that you'll notice, the biggest difference. All right, so I will tell you this. I mean, this is probably the most entertaining part of the class right there that we just did.
I will say I do have a doctor's appointment for my baby. I heard you saying
Yeah.
something about that at
Yeah, you can
2:10,
walk out
so
anytime.
I'll have to run out about 2
You got a
o'clock.
phone call, you got to go potty, you just think, this is boring as hell. I mean, you can leave and I won't know the difference, you know? Last time we had the class, we had one person. I told you that last week. And they backed them up back to back. But typically, if it's on a Tuesday, so I can say something about it in team meeting, then we get a few more people to come. And you can come multiple times, you know, so you don't have to feel like, okay, I know it all after doing this first time. But your one job in real estate, really, when it comes down to it, you know, if you're gonna, is to generate leads. Lead generation, it doesn't matter how you do it. I don't care how you do it. The plumbing business would actually be a good one because somebody might be prepping their house to sell, you know, and so if you just happen to be there and you just happen to have your business card and you happen to say, you know what, why don't I do a CMA for you, which is a comparative market analysis. And, you know, if you're interested, you know, the nice thing about it is if there's any plumbing issues when we have an inspection, I'm your girl.
Mhm.
You know, you just call me and, you know, we'll give you a little discounted rate to get your plumbing work done. You know?
Yeah, that's kind of where we were kind of going with that.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, you know, your foot's in the door already. You've already been inside the house.
Oh, yeah.
But lead generation is where it's at. Now, this bold class is coming up. You ought to attend the initial bold class, grab a contract. You should attend that free one anyway, if you've got time and it works into your schedule, because they'll talk about some lead generation methods there, even if you don't take the class. I will tell you this, they've been promoting it, but really they should just let me promote it. Because you come out of there, you're gonna do, and this is the average nationwide, is 11 more transactions, just out of the 8-week class. That translates like to $78,000. So it's an $800 investment, but you know, you got tools that cost $800.
Oh, you got a lot.
When I was in the restaurant business, I can still remember when I first got in there, real estate, and my wife said, go get us some lock boxes. So I went out to the board and, in Branson and said, I need some lock boxes. How many you need? I said, well, at least 50. And they said, so what are you gonna do with 50 lock boxes? I got them on list 50 houses. Do you have 50 or not? They were $35 a piece. When I was in the restaurant business, my French fryer went down, it was $5,000. And French fries were $1 an order. So I had to sell 5,000 before I made $1. I put one lockbox on a house. Even back then, the average sale price was like 101 or something. You know, here I make $3,000. I paid for all the lockboxes. I paid for my school. You know, I'm like, you guys are idiots. You don't know how to run a business. You know, if you get that kind of return off of something. I had agents too who would go to the board when I was at Carol Jones as their vice president and say, they'd come in and see me and say, you know, boy, I'm so excited, you know, My house is under contract. As soon as that one gets done, I've got another one I'm gonna list. I'm like, so what are you waiting for? So, well, I only have one lockbox. I mean, that's limiting belief, isn't it? You can't do that. You just, I mean, if you have to, go on Facebook Marketplace and sell some of your old clothes or something, you can get $90 and get that second house on the market because they still take 30 to 45 days to close, and you don't wait for things like that. So even with this bold class, I know it's $800, which sounds like a fortune after you've already spent a couple $1,000s to get in the business. You come out of there, and even if you do a crappy job and don't pay much attention and just follow some of it, you'll probably do half as many as the average person does. Well, in this market, at $260,000 average sale price in Springfield, $7,800. Even after you're split, you've paid for the class, you've paid for your lock boxes, you paid for your school, you paid for your transportation. And I'll tell you the bonus, 8 days is all it is, right? And you get lunch. That's $20 a day. I don't care where you go. You can go down to Quiznos down there and it's $8.50 for a sandwich if you don't buy chips and a drink. It ends up around $11 if you buy chips and a drink, maybe $12. But you got your time and your gas. Well, you can go there and sit and they'll give you a $20 meal and you might get a referral. You might do some whatever. Doesn't matter. Anyhow, to me, it was silly. I've been to it 3 or 4 times and even I make money coming out of there. And I'm not, I'm not like you guys. I've been in it so long that all my business is referrals. I don't knock on doors and I don't do open houses. I will if I'm forced to, but I don't generate business that way. So, all right. So we're looking at a contract. So lead generation, that's the key. I just don't want you to ever forget that. It's just not much different what you do. I mean, you couldn't survive in your business unless you generate leads. And if you lose an account, then you've got to go find another account to replace it. Same thing. Just like Lucas Grable said this morning, I got to have irons in the fire so I have something to do. The contract starts with the buyer, and it used to have the seller up here too. It had the buyer and then the seller, or the seller and the buyer, but the attorneys decided that needs to go on the last line because all we're really selling is real estate. So up here, you can see it's Michael Spencer Harris. This is a good agent that wrote this, Brandy Lee Harris, because Harris is a common last name. Michael and Brandy both are too. This really identifies to the title company that they're, who these people are. So when they do title searches, because when they do title searches, you know what else they look for? Child support, tax liens, and things like that. Okay. So it's good to have their whole name if you want to. Like, if you put Bob Smith up there, I guarantee the title company's calling you and wanting the last 4 digits of a social security number. The other thing is, these are probably husband and wife, but they could be brother and sister, and it could be Michael and Bob, right? And it could be Brandy and Susie. But it's nice to know what their status is for the title company. So you could put husband and wife, ASP, which is a single person, AMP, which is a married person, because I can buy by my own self, can I? I don't have to have my wife there until it's a loan, and then they'll ask late in the transaction, you need to add your wife to the transaction because you don't have enough money, something like that. The lender will. The other thing we can have on the buyer's side, trust, LLCs, any type of legal grouping that can purchase property. Now, if you put up there, if like mine's Kelby Lane Inc. is the name of my corporation, I can buy there, but I can't sign Kelby Lane Inc. I have to sign James L. Bolin or Chris L. Bolin or James L. Bolin and Chris L. Bolin. Okay? But you could see Dina Mae Nanneman, co-trustee of the E.R. Miller Trust, amended 1990. That could be the buyer. So what's the next thing you ask after you write Dina Mae Nanneman, co-trustee of the E.R. Miller Trust, amended 1990? I'm going to need a copy of the trust agreement. Say it. Trust. I'll need a copy of the trust for who? Title company. I don't need the entire trust, but I need pages that state that you can buy or sell real estate. in the trust. And that's just like 2 or 3 pages. You have to have the cover and the introductory page that names everybody in the trust, but then towards the back, there's 2 or 3 pages that say this individual can buy or sell, and he's the signee or the signor. Property address, be clear on this. This is a circle. Don't put avenue because it'll get kicked out in the loan process. And it can cost you a closing. So circle, avenue, street, whatever it says, make sure that's correct, especially if it's a government loan. And then correct zip code and then the correct county. And if you're dealing with Murney, you're gonna have to put the cities up there. Bear Grove, Springfield, Ozark, whatever, they're gonna ask for it because their compliance department thinks that everything in this area is a municipality. It's really not, it's a city, which is different than a municipality. A municipality is a part of a city or part of a specific area. Chesterfield in St. Louis, Crestwood, but that's okay. If they want it, put it in there. Don't ever argue with anybody when you're trying to get closed and get paid. If you want me to do it, I'll do it, okay? We don't do the legal description very often unless it's meets and bounds. So you've got a property that you just sold and the tax records come up and it's got a meets and bounds description. What I do is I check the box, I attach the CRS data, which is the courthouse retrieval system data in the MLS, and I have all parties initial that. Because I want that to be the guide for the title company. Now, if it's a property that's been separated from another larger property, split off, if they don't have a survey, you really need a survey. So you need to write that in. And I always ask for the seller to pay for the survey if it's not already there. If I have a survey, I'll check the box and we'll attach the survey. And what's going to happen is you ask the seller to pay, the seller more times than not is going to say, no, I won't pay. And then you ask him if he will split the cost. And then worst case scenario, the buyer pays for it. Okay? But you always ask the seller to do it. Because if it doesn't close, who benefits? The seller, right? Inclusions and exclusions. This is when we get into trouble because people forget that that shiny French style refrigerator with the double doors like this is in every picture. It's in the MLS. They check the box in the disclosures. I got a refrigerator. It's in the marketing remarks. You see it everywhere. Even in the inspection, there it is. And then you go to close and the refrigerator is not included in the transaction. It's only included if you write it into the contract. So it's key that you do that. So the property includes, but not limited to, all of the following, which are now located on the real estate, all of which seller warrants to convey to buyer free and clear at closing. So I don't owe money on it. This contract and not a seller's disclosure. Not the MLS detail sheet. Not any promotional material provides what's included in this sale. And they give you a general list because that general list applies, but at the same time, it doesn't apply to everything. So if there's something you want in the house, then you can put it in there, even if it's personal property, because a refrigerator really in the Midwest is considered personal property. If you went to the East Coast or the West Coast, you're included in every sale, unless they're excluded. It's just a tradition here. So you see everything here. There's some odd ones like hardwired PET systems. Those are typically underground, but you've got to include the collars and the controls. Now, I've seen people exclude the collars because they're for pit bulls and they've got chihuahuas, or the reverse, okay? Electrical lighting and TV related, attached antennas and TV mounts. So if we pull this out of here and take it with us, there's a big, ugly hole in the wall, but we need the mount to stay. This came from after a few years when everybody started mounting their TVs on the walls, that people would take them with them and take the mounts and leave the hole. Can't have that. You go to the walkthroughs, big hole in the wall. So then they started taking the TV and taking the mount and repairing the wall and doing a bad job. So finally they said, look, just leave the mount here. You know, we'll work it out from there. So that's where that came from. So you can go in a lot of times, like I've got a house under contract right now that people are leaving every mounted TV because they don't want to mess with them. and they don't know, how to fit in the new house they're going into. And they're not that expensive anymore, right? So, not like they used to be. Flush mounted speakers. I was asked the question, is that a flush mounted speaker up there on the wall? I think people could argue whether it is or not. So really, if you want the speaker system, whatever it is, you should include it rather than take the chance that you're going to come in and there's going to be just wires dangling out of the ceiling or out of the wall. I would suggest writing it in. Even if it says in the MLS, the Bose speaker system included in the transaction, write it into the included. All right, heating, cooling, plumbing, solar panels. Okay, if you're going to list a house, what's the first question you ask? Are they paid for? Okay. If you're taking a buyer to a house with solar panels, what's the first question you ask? Are they paid for? And I guarantee you, they're probably not. They were probably financed. This guy came to me yesterday with he's got a potential listing, and people owe $24,000 on the solar panels. Now their bill's only $13 a month, the electric bill, but they're paying $150 a month for the next 15 years for the solar panels. So I don't know if they're coming out ahead or not. I don't know. That's not my decision. But the point is, if he puts that house on the market and the people don't want the solar panels, who takes them off? Who pays for that? $4,500 basically to remove solar panels and then make repairs to the roof, I guess, with the, I guess you'd have to goop up every hole where they came out of the roof. Point is, beware of solar panels until they become more common. But the first question to ask, do you own them or are they financed? And if they're financed, can your buyer take over the financing, one? And if he can't take over the financing, if this is added to his financing, does that terminate the loan? Because it is debt to income. So if you're buying $150,000, is there any of those left? $150,000 house, and they got $24,000 in systems on there, and you go back to the bank and say, I'm going to have to finance the $24,000 of solar panels too, and they go, your debt to income ratio will not work. So here's what I told the guy anyhow. I said, your people are getting $100,000 more than they paid 3 years ago if they get the price they've got it listed for. In my opinion, what they should do is offer a $10,000 payment on those solar panels to reduce it to a more palatable amount, because 24 and 14 sound a lot different, don't they? So, yes, sir.
We have one right now that we're agreeing to pay it off with an acceptable offer because that's the only way they got it done.
Yeah. What's the price of the house?
210.
That's unbelievable. But I think a lot of people are going to run into that because they won't be able to sell.
$33,000 system.
They still owe that, I'm sure. And
I bought it like a year ago.
be a lot, but you should learn to deal with that. You should be prepared to deal with it. Like I went to a house and showed it to this lady I'm working with, and it had the big panels in the backyard, a bunch of them in the backyard. As soon as I saw them, I pulled in the driveway. I mean, it's like, oh no, I don't want to deal with that. Propane tanks. If you're going to list a house, the first question you ask is if they have propane gas or heat or anything like that is, do you own the propane tank? And if they own the propane tank, it's not a problem because they can buy gas from wherever they want to. At closing, it says it on line 223 or something, I think, they get credited, they get a check from the buyer for the amount of propane or on-site fuel. So it doesn't, if they've got a 500-gallon tank, it's got 250 gallons. The day or the day before it closes, you need to get a reading on that, and the buyer has to pay for that. That's the same if it's a lease tank. The lease tank, though, says if I lease the tank and I'm paying $50 a year or whatever for the tank, I'd have to buy from that company. The only way you can get rid of that is use up all the gas, cancel the contract, enter into a new contract with somebody else. Okay? So propane tanks are a bad one too. And we've had agents in this company that have bought propane tanks. And we've had agents in this company that have bought the gas in the propane tanks because they didn't follow the contract. Fireplace and equipment doors, who would think? but some people take them, so they stay. Barbecue grills and fire pits built in. You know, it's so common now, you see this big deck and it's got the green egg in there. If you want the green egg, you better write it, or the Primo, or whatever type of grill it is. Because if not, you're gonna get there and there's a big hole in the deck, right? So pay attention. And then you can do the rectangular ones too. I don't know what they're called, but you can do that. Microwave ovens built in. That doesn't mean slid into a hole. That means they're built in. So like if you try to pull them, they're not coming out. They stay with the house. Blind shade shutters, we always deal with that. Attached mirrors and all bathroom mirrors. HGTV has had this deal where everybody just sets a mirror behind the sink. You've seen that? I've seen it. All right. So the deal is those stay. So if you do a walkthrough and that mirror was there and it's, you know, this big Hobby Lobby mirror or whatever, you need to get on the phone to the other agent right away and say, look, mirror's missing. You can either compensate my buyer or you can bring the mirror back. If you have the refrigerator written into the contract, you get to the house for the walkthrough and the refrigerator's not there, you get on the phone to the other agent, you say, you can either bring the refrigerator back or compensate my buyer for the refrigerator. On curtain and drapery, all the hardware stays. You know, the curtains don't have to, but the hardware has to stay. It's just like a TV mount, basically, is what it is. Okay? So you can see down here, like I said, good agent. Kitchen fridge. She didn't just say refrigerator or refrigerator, because if I had a refrigerator in the garage, could I move that white refrigerator into the house? Yes, I could. She said kitchen fridge, washing machine, and heard that in a long time, dryer, hot tub, and basement bidet to convey at no value. Now she puts at no value because the lender gets freaked out if you say it has value. So just add at no value at the end of where you're including anything, and that will eliminate the lender freaking out. And what's excluded? This lady wanted to keep her master bidet, so she's keeping her master bidet. Anybody here got a bidet? No? Now, exclude any items reserved, leased, or not owned by sellers, such as propane tanks, water softeners, solar panels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you see a storage building in the backyard, it's not bolted down on a concrete foundation or base, that is personal property and can be removed. So if you want it, what do you need to do? You've got to include it. How about the play set in the backyard? If you want it, you include it. What if your people don't want it? You exclude it to be removed prior to closing. How about the gnomes? You want all the gnomes? No? Okay. If you don't want them, you wouldn't have to put that in there. But this, I had one call the other day where this lady took out a 7 or 8 foot tall bush that she liked. I mean, it's probably a flowering bush, a hydrangea or something. Is that the right word? It's a big green bush with pink or white flowers. Is that a hydrangea? I think it is, yeah. Anyhow, she dug the damn thing up and took it with her. Can you do that? No. So it's kind of like, well, you can't really do that. What does the other agent say? She's, she's apologizing. She didn't know what to do. Well, she needs to replace it, right? So the question was, let's say it dies rather than she stole it. If you replace it 7 or 8 bush because we've had excessive heat for 30 days and it died, you have to replace it with the same size bush.
So yeah, something comparable, I would think.
Yeah. I said no. And here's the reason I said no, is because any arborist will tell you, and greenhouse owner, if you dig up a 7-foot bush in July or August, and then you transplant it, I don't care what you do, it's probably going to die or be damaged to some degree. You're better off getting a sapling and planting it and letting it grow. You're much better off there. They've got a better chance of surviving because those other ones are already stressed, so that's just my opinion. You can do what you want to on that. But when you call, I'm going to tell you, no, you should get the sapling, the little one. You shouldn't get the big one. All right, purchase price, it's easy. You write it in there. We used to have to write a check too. That didn't work well because people would get the numbers wrong and then we'd have a contract that was voidable. So they write 560,000, then they write 560. If they don't agree, then it's a voidable check. So the lawyers took that out. Seller concessions. Now the sellers originally on this offer, they made another offer that I think maybe just died. They wanted $5,000 in concessions. You think, what the heck? You know, somebody's buying a $500,000 house, they want concessions. Don't ever be surprised if somebody wants concessions. It's just part of the negotiations. And if they are FHA or VA or USDA, they may need the concessions. You know, they've worked hard, 2 kids, young folks have been able to save $6,000 towards their first house. They're buying FHA, but they might not have another $6,000 for all those things that the lender's going to charge. And the escrows for insurance and taxes and everything else. And then they might not have any money to live on for 2 or 3 months. So when somebody asks for concessions, if your seller freaks out, say, hey, look, remember where we're at and who's buying this and so on. And if they still don't agree, say, okay, let's add it to the sales price. Don't just give up on it and say, no, I'm not giving it to them, because they probably need it, right? And then the next call is to the lender, if you're a buyer's agent, to say, we're going to add the $6,000 to the closing cost on this $150,000 house. Will the buyer still qualify? Will that be okay? And the lender will say yes or no. And if he says no, then you've got to, hopefully negotiate with the agent. And then they put down $1,000 in earnest money. We're going to talk about earnest money right now because we'll get it out of the way. It always references here paragraph 8 whenever we talk about earnest money. Paragraph 8 says that if you put down earnest money, it's going to go into an escrow account, typically at a title company. Never write it to Keller Williams if you work here. It's got to go to a title company, okay? Yes? All right. Once it gets there, it's not coming out. Unless you close. And if you close, it gets applied to the purchase. But if for some reason this contract falls apart, and right now this contract's in the middle of inspection negotiations, but if it falls apart and the seller says, I want that money, they don't get that money unless they sign a mutual release. If the buyer says, well, I want the money because the seller's not doing the repairs, and the seller goes, no. So unless you have 2 signatures or the signatures of all parties on a contract, the earnest money will stay there for a minimum of 60 days, but it can stay up to 365 days, and then it'll get sent to the state treasurer's office into unclaimed funds. Okay? Got it? All right. Once it gets to the state treasurer's office, let's say the buyer and seller say, you know what? Let's just agree to take that out. They've got to go get signed a notarized letter by both of them saying, we've reached an agreement. We want the money released. Okay? Guess where it goes?
Back to the title company.
Back to the title company. And then what do you have to get it out of the title company? A mutual release of earnest money. So when somebody asks you how much earnest money do I have to put down, you don't have to put any down to make a contract good. Now, we've gone through a period of time here for the last 18 months where you better offer some earnest money, because people are looking at everything in the contract and saying, you know, does that add value? Yes, it does. So it is a good thing if you put down earnest money. When I first got in, you'll love this. If I sold a $260,000 house, I might put down $26,000 as earnest money. 10%. Wasn't uncommon. $1 million property, $100,000 earnest money. Because they were in earnest. That's what that means. You guys went to school, right? It means I'm in earnest. I really do want to do this. I'm earnest about this transaction. But I can tell you, brokers have more problems with earnest money. The nice thing about Keller Williams not having an escrow account, when the client calls me and says, Josh won't release my earnest money, I go, you know what? It's not Josh. It's the title company. You've got to deal with the title company. We have to have the signatures of all parties. I know you want it, but until the buyer or the seller, whatever it is, agrees, you can't do it. All right, so in this case, the first time we get to mention the title company is Hogan Land and Title, 1605 East Sunshine as the escrow agent, meaning they're holding the earnest money. And then in the next section here, on 4, where's it gonna close? We're gonna close at Hogan Land and Title. It makes sense if you put the earnest money there, then you should close there too. Now, right above that, it talks about you get 5 days on line 26 to deposit the earnest money. You should write on your paper right now 10. Line 26, write 10 in there, because nobody runs around with a checkbook anymore. Okay? Now, the title companies have started taking online.
That one is different than this one that you have on paper.
The contract is?
Yeah, 26, it actually states 10 as a checkbox. Either has been provided.
That contract, but that's an old contract though. Well, nothing I can do about it, because they've already handed them out. I didn't hand them out.
Still the same line. It is the right line.
It is the right line, but it says 10.
This one is the checkbox where you have the version of delivered with the contract.
Okay, well, this one says 5. So the point is, if it says 5, write 10. That was a change made by somebody smarter than me up on the state level, and it doesn't work. That's bad. Well, we'll just go ahead and we'll get close to the same place as we go down through here. And then the reason you do that, if you'll look in black, it says if the earnest money is not timely delivered. Does that say that on yours too? Okay. If it's not timely delivered, which would be 5 days on the contract I'm looking at and the one that's on the screen, then the seller can terminate it by providing notice thereof to buyer at any time prior to delivery of the earnest money. I'm not sure how that works. Because I'm not sure if they can go to the 4th day and say we're terminating the contract because it hadn't been deposited, but it might. So to avoid that, what do? Get the earnest money in the title company as quickly as possible. So that's part of your job as a buyer's agent, to remind your buyer that they have earnest money that needs to be delivered.
I'm just gonna make a plug. I don't use them a ton. Great American Title has the Earnest app. It's digital. It's amazing. It's saved our rear ends multiple times.
Hogan does too.
They haven't
Implemented it yet?
publicized theirs very much yet,
Yeah,
but it's phenomenal.
yeah.
Everybody's starting to a little bit,
It,
right?
it needs
Meridians.
to be done. And
Meridians.
according to GAT, it is from when your client hits submit, not from when GAT receives the funds, because it's a wire, so it may take 24, 48 hours. It's whenever they click submit, that becomes legal for that client.
Good.
So just a,
So the next section we go to is a closing, and this is where your buyer, a lot of times, if they don't have earnest money, selects a title company. So you know who they're gonna ask, right? They're gonna ask you. You know, unless they're doing a lot of transactions, they probably don't know anybody. If they're out of the area, they certainly don't. So they're gonna ask you for a recommendation. And again, I would suggest that you give them choices. And if you give them choices and then they say, where do you want to close? Then you can write that down. You know, because you've given them choices, but they choose whoever you want. Now, one of the things you'll see is that not all closing companies' closing costs are the same. So it's not a bad idea to investigate that either. And the thing you want from a title company is you want them to process your contract quickly. You want them to provide a title commitment within the timeframes, generally 10 days. And then you want to have a smooth closing. You want them definitely, if your title company doesn't ask you for the contact information on your client, then they're not worth a damn. You know, if they're waiting until the last week to call you and say, hey, we ain't got no contact info for John and Bob or whoever this is up here, then they're not a good title company. They should have that right up front. Like Veris has a cover sheet that they send with every contract that says, here's all the contact info. It's the phone number, the full name, the email of both parties, if they've got them. And that's what you want. And you might, if you go to any of these classes with any of these high-end agents that are really busted it, all of them are using cover sheets.
you can ask your title company and they'll give you
Cover sheet?
coverage. That's where we built ours off of.
Yeah, there you go. All right, now it says the closing agent, you don't have to name the individual, you name the title company. And then on 37 on my paper on the screen, you have to have an address. So I just put if I'm using Hogan, I just put Sunshine Street, Springfield. I don't have to put 1605. But if you're using Great American or Meridian or Hogan, or I guess that's probably it, most of them, you've got to give a street address at least, okay? I'm not signed out, what are you talking about? Stop that. No. Cancel. I think it's agent. I don't know. Okay, I don't care. Please move this window away from. Back, about that. See ya.
See ya, sorry,
That's all right. You got almost through the first page.
almost.
You come back next month.
Oh, I will be.
It is the important page.
Huh?
I said it is one of the most important pages.
Yeah. You got any clues on this? Leave meeting. How about that? Assign a new host.
You tried clicking just off the screen.
There you go. That's all right. We got it.
It just
now.
shows you. You don't see your screen.
You can share your screen now.
Where's that at?
I don't know. You know. I
On
could figure,
Zoom.
I could figure it out, but I
Is
don't
this
know.
Zoom or is it?
Oh, man.
Quick share screen.
We need this especially since the paper doesn't match. Camera. Front.
Desktop.
This camera. Oh, no, it is a desktop. Don't stop sharing. What am I doing? Desktop, share screen. Click share screen. There's a share screen here somewhere on this one. No?
Sign in.
We'll keep talking here in just a second here. Let me call. Not doing anything here. Launch meeting. My phone's not working.
No service down here. I'll text her if she's on her phone. Screen share. Which one do you want to share? That one? Or that one? The launch, this one. Yeah, this one's the one that we're on. Yeah.
Did it do it?
There you
Good
go.
man. But I didn't answer anyway. Thank you. All right, so when you're picking your closing date, you have to ask your client, when do you want to close? And they go, and we'd like to close in 30 days. So the next question is, you have to call the lender and see if the lender can close in 30 days. On a conventional loan or cash, you can close wherever you want. Well, not conventional, but cash you can close wherever you want in 7 to 10 days every time. Conventional, probably 30 days. Anything else, you need to ask the lender right off the bat. And so you're going to have to start having conversations with the lender first, because almost every offer you make is going to require a letter of pre-approval at the least, right? Something that says they can buy up to this amount. right? So in this case, August 26, this was actually 60 days from when we wrote the contract. But that's what the seller wanted. And the buyer agreed to it, so we're all good on it. Possession keys to be delivered to buyer at closings. And then what is a closing? It says it down here. Subject to the terms of this contract, the sale will be closed, which means the unconditional release and exchange of the deed for the purchase price together with all documents and funds. You're gonna find out sometimes you're gonna go to a closing and you're gonna sign all the documents and the funds aren't there. You haven't closed. Until the funds arrive and they're exchanged, then you haven't closed yet. It says that brokers aren't responsible for delivery of keys. We all deliver the keys. That's just part of what we do. If we've got the seller will sometimes bring the keys, but a lot of times they'll hand the keys to us and we'll hand them to the buyer. So I would say though that the buyer should change locks or change the codes or whatever once they get in. We've got 417 Rekey that works with us, and they can go in and rekey just the lock without having to replace the whole mechanism. That's really a good deal. It's not a bad closing gift. My mother-in-law, we sold her house a couple years ago, and we did it the day it transferred because she might have 50 keys out there. You know, she was old and she'd give the key to whoever, you know. So we didn't want those people to have somebody show up at their bedside late at night. If you're going to do possession other than closing, I don't recommend it. Possession prior, possession after. I don't recommend it. However, I think it's a good idea to use that document limited purpose entry by buyer prior to closing. Because if I'm moving from one house to the other, even in Springfield, I might be able to move my smaller possessions, like in boxes, into a third car garage. If the house is completely vacant, I might be able to use more than just one of the garages. I might be able to use two. I had one recently that moved all her stuff from Colorado to here, and she moved everything into the house. At an additional cost of $2,000 in earnest money and $30 a day. Which, you know,
That's cheap.
what the heck? I know.
Someone did a bad job negotiating that one.
Yeah. She was kind of, she'd already passed the closing date because she was waiting for a Social Security certificate. She already had the letter that said you're going to get this X, but she had to wait for the federal government to provide a certificate, which caused a delay of 19 days. It cost her $570. Yeah. But it's okay. All right, so where else would you use a limited purpose entry? What would be another contract you might think that you might need to move stuff and it might take more than one day? Cattle, any farm. I don't care if it's 10 acres, but anything over 10 acres for sure. They've got multiple vehicles, they've got trailers. They may have some type of critters, whether they be goats or cows or whatever they might be, horses. But you can't move all that stuff in one day. And so if they're closing on a property, they're going to need to move everything off too. I sold a farm over in Miller, and it took them 7 days to move all their equipment from Spokane to Miller, and their cattle, and their horses, and their donkey. I don't know if that's any goats or not. I can't remember. They had something there. All right, second page. Contract, you're going to have to check one box or the other. I've gone through this recently where there was no boxes checked because they didn't have anything. And compliance, not only at our company, but the other company said, you got to check something. So the contract is not contingent upon the seller closing of another property. That's the best contract you can get. All they're doing is borrowing the money, okay? This contract is contingent upon the sale and or closing of an existing property. If the box is checked and complete and attach either rider, one is for the sale of buyer's existing property, one is a contingency for closing of existing buyer's property. These are two totally different animals. So I have a house, I want to buy that house over there, and so I write an offer and it's contingent on the sale of my property. My property might not even be on the market. Is that a strong offer? Say no. I want to buy that house over there and my house is on the market in Republic under 200,000, clean as a whistle. Is that a good offer? Yes, there's probably only 4 houses. Maybe there's no houses under 200 in Republic right now. That's not a bad offer. I'd look at the house. That's the first thing I always ask the people, and it's on the sheet. You know, let me look at the house. You know, how long you been on the market? They've probably been on like 6 hours. And I'll see, you know, what I think. But if you think it's going to close quickly or it's going to go under contract quickly, not a bad deal. Now, what if it's in Oregon or Arizona or wherever it might be? Then you might have no idea. And so you have to talk to the agent in the other city and say, okay, what's your market like? And so one of the first questions you ask, not only what your market's like, but days on market. What are days on market? What about days on market in this price range? Because days on market on a $575,000 house in Springfield is not the same as a $200,000 house in Republic. So you've got to ask those questions too. Now, this one, contingency for the closing of buyer's existing property, that house is already under contract. That's a good one. To me, that's just like a loan contingency. It's even better if they're already through the inspections. And they've already negotiated that. That was the same as financing.
Helpful tip on that, Jim's saying, check on the price point. Don't call the listing agent, call another agent in that market, because that listing agent's gonna hype themselves up pretty hard.
That's
So
good. I never thought of that. I always call the listing agent.
I always call somebody else, and I'll even ask questions on the listing agent, like, hey, how do you know them? What's their reputation? How'd they do?
Oh, no, I do that.
But
But I've been around long enough where I know most of them. So,
I'm saying if it's like in Oregon or something like.
oh,
that.
in Oregon.
Yeah.
I have never done that on a out-of-state property. That's interesting. That's a great tip. You should write that down. This is a good one. So we've got that, but again, so if they make this offer, or if you make this offer and you check that box, you've got to have one of those riders attached. It's got to be a part of it, or the contract could be invalid. Okay? We had an agent out, Phil Reed out east. He got an offer, said, great offer, and it had this contingency on it, but it didn't have a rider enclosed or attached. And so he calls the agent and says, look, I can't present this offer. And she goes, you got to present all offers per code of ethics. And he goes, it's not complete. You don't have the documents. You know, as soon as you get the documents, I'll present the offer. Well, she never presented the documents. So, all right, always check appraisal contingency. Don't even question it. Even if you're buying an investment property, I still do that when I'm buying an investment property. Hey, here's a reason, $30,000 property. If my bank decides, if I want to get some financing, that they want to take a look at it and determine what the value is in their mind, and they come back and tell me it's worth 20, I'd rather pay 20 than 30, right? So I check this. Now, does this weaken your offer on investment properties? Yes, it does. So you got to remember that too. Investment properties are a different deal. But for everybody else, check the box. Now, if you have a government loan, FHA, VA, USDA, HUD, it really doesn't matter because their appraisal contingency goes to the last day of closing. Okay? VA, FHA, always have that in there that it must appraise the contract value because that's all we're going to loan. Now, what it goes on to say in the next sentence of the VA or the government amendment is, however, the buyer can still buy it if he wants to. So VA, any government loan, the appraisal contingency runs till closing. Now, if you look here and read this in detail, which I'm not going to, you should put 45 days in here. Well, what you should put is the term of your contract. And my line is 62, but it's a first blank. You should put the term of the contract, whatever that is. If it's a 30-day contract or a 60-day contract, run it out because the appraisals don't take place until late in the contract. They wait late for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. What that says is, okay, if within that, 60-day contract, day 50, I get back the appraisal and you've written a contract for $575 and it comes back at $550, then I have the opportunity to negotiate using an appraisal notice. And I send it over to the seller and I say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the appraisal came in at $550,000. I'd like you to reduce the price to that. And then she's got, or they have, 5 days to respond. And they can either reduce, or they can negotiate, or the contract automatically terminates. Okay, so to recoup all that, make an offer. I put the term of the contract in the appraisal. The appraiser goes out. It doesn't appraise for value, it appraises for less. I send an appraisal notice to the seller. I say, look, my buyer would like to buy your house, but it didn't appraise. The lender's only going to loan X. You know, they're going to loan that appraisal value. So I'd like for you to reduce it to the appraised value. Now you can still negotiate that. So let's say your buyers really want the house and they're a conventional loan, they've got some cash. They can actually pay more if they want to, okay? And then 5 days for them to respond or it automatically terminates. On the financing contingency, it's either not contingent upon financing, but you can still borrow money if you want to. Buyer may finance any portion. So an investor may say, look, you know, I want to buy that house. It's $150,000. It's not contingent on financing, but I might borrow some money. So they could ask for a pre-approval letter or a proof of funds. They could do that. But I might not want to use all my cash just on the purchase. I want to save some of my cash for the rehab, maybe. 2, non-conventional. If this is checked, then you've got to attach the government loan. It's an addendum. You've got to attach that. And again, what I tell you about the appraisal, it runs all the way till close. Don't ever forget that, because somebody will tell you, hey, you know, you didn't mark that box up there. It doesn't matter. Government loans run all the way to close. And then conventional, I'm not sure why the language is here that says you got to do all things reasonably necessary. That paragraph is supposed to apply to every type of loan, but it doesn't look, it looks like it only applies to conventional. The deal is this. Here, you should do the same thing you did up on the appraisal box. You should put the term of your contract here. So if it's a 60-day contract, put 60. If it's 45, put 45, 30, 30. Because when you have a loan problem, it typically doesn't come up until the last 7 days of the transaction. And you'll get a call from a lender, and the lender will say, you know, unfortunately, we're not able to make this loan. You know, I found out they've got some medical stuff back in their history that we can't get rid of, or whatever it might be. We see it not commonly, but it happens. But if you don't have the full term of your contract, then down there it says, if the loan contingency deadline passes without a termination, buyer remains obligated under this contract and must have available all funds required to close. You know, the bank says, nope, sorry, can't loan you the money 5 days before closing. And the contract says you still got to buy it. So what that does, it puts your client in default if he doesn't close. They might not be able to close financially, but it puts them in default. So just make sure that this is a full term of the contract. This next section is actually protection for your buyer. So what kind of loan are they getting? Again, you've already talked to the lender. Lender says, well, they're going to put down 15%. So that means they're getting a loan for 85% of the price. If you do that, you don't have to do this. And then here they said, we can do this, but we can't do it if the interest rate exceeds 6%. Well, hell, the way it was going, it looked like it might have got over there pretty quick too. But it's not, so we're good. But if it went over 6, they could terminate the contract. And they're getting a 5-1 ARM, which is an adjustable rate mortgage. We don't see much of that anymore. It's still amortized over 30 years, but it's a 5-1 ARM. So you know this agent has talked to their lender, right? Because you wouldn't normally guess that somebody's getting an ARM. I haven't seen an ARM used in 15 years on contract. But it's a different market, isn't it? The interest rate went from 3% in January to 5.5 or whatever it is now, 5 maybe. Okay, good on this? So this is protection, this interest rate. You've got $150,000, $200,000 buyer, which are our first-time home buyers now. If they can't buy above 5%, if that creates an issue with their debt-to-income ratio, then that's what you need to put in there to protect them. And then if the interest rate exceeds that, they could proceed with the loan if they can find more money, but they don't necessarily have to. If you check those boxes up and said, I've got a house to sell, then this says, if you don't attach those and you can't obtain a loan, then you're still under contract. You still have to bring the money. So that's why you make sure you attach the correct rider, okay? That protects your client again. On title and survey, as soon as you go under contract, even though it's a listing agent's job, maybe to send it to the title company, you should send it to the title company too, the entire contract. When I say entire contract, any pertinent parts, so the contract, any counters, okay? Anything like that. Should go to the title company. And then this is where you would send over your cover sheet saying, I'm the agent, here's the other agent, here's the sellers, here's the buyers. I represent the buyers, here's all their contact information. And then all of your contact information. And then what I'm seeing recently is if you're like Ferris Network or Grady's or whatever, then they're going to send over and say, this is the admin that'll be representing or assisting us with this contract. You probably won't be doing that if you're a new agent. You'll wait until you hit about 6 million or somewhere in there. Now, the seller paid title fees are not very much. And so the best fit for most sellers is C, which says sellers shall deliver to buyer a title commitment, means they're going to do a title search and then give a commitment. And then it'll be at the owner's cost. And then the owner's policy, the new owners, will be at the buyer's cost. That's the best option. Because the buyer is insuring the title from the time they close until they sell it again. And the seller is saying, look, I want you to look back and make sure my title is clear and there's no ghosts on there, nothing that's going to cause a problem. All the others, especially A and B, benefit the buyer more than the seller. And then D benefits the seller more than the buyer. We don't think the buyer is going to do that. Right? So when you look at those, C is the optimal choice. Now, if you're trying to sweeten the deal for the seller to make it more acceptable, you could check box D, and it's going to cost him probably $300 or $400 more. But I mean, a lot of times sellers don't understand that. And they think they're getting a hell of a deal if you check box D. So if you're trying to sweeten the deal a little bit, you call the other agent and say, look, send it over an offer, make sure and look at that. I check box D. My buyer is going to pay for your seller's title fees. You know, and even most agents go, wow, that's pretty cool. It's just not very much money in the whole scheme of things. And then again, on 105 on my line on the screen here, the title commitment owner's policy shall be issued by Hogan Land and Title because that's who we picked for the earnest money deposit. That's who we picked to close that. So they obviously should do the title work also. And then 106 all the way going on to the next page talks about the survey. You can do a survey if you want to. Any buyer can ask for a survey and they can pay for it themselves. And if you discover any liens, easements, encroachments, you're buying 50 acres, it turns out it's 40, then the seller has to correct that prior to closing, has to agree to it in writing, or it will not close. It could not close. The buyer would have to say, I accept it as it is. Point is, even if the buyer pays for the survey and they find out these issues, it's got an easement and an encroachment, and it's less land than I thought I was buying, and the seller says, I'm not going to fix it, I don't care what you do. Now the seller is responsible for the survey because the buyer couldn't close on the property, even though the buyer paid for it. That's what that whole paragraph says. But if you look on 111 is the line I've got on the screen. I don't know what it is on yours. The buyer has blank days to review the title. he's gonna have to have the full term of the contract to get a survey in this market, and probably longer. So you want to put at least the full term of the contract. When we get to inspections, it's pretty straightforward, really. And this is causes a lot of problems in our transactions. Obviously, negotiating a price and getting a closing date and all that's one thing. But when you get to inspections, it really can cause some problems. But notice what the contract says. Is it on line 135 for you guys? Where is it at? It's on the next page.
135 is the beginning of it.
Yeah. The property is being sold in its present condition with no warranties expressed or implied except as may be given to the buyer in writing. So the seller has said, I'll do this or this or this in writing. Conditions of the property that are disclosed or clearly visible should be considered by buyer in setting the purchase price, or by making correction of such conditions by seller requirement of the contract. So, bottom line is this: I walk up to a house, it's got a broken glass in the door. I write it in the contract, in the offer. I go in and my client goes, my God, look at the holes in the carpet. And I said, would you like me to include that in the offer? So I include it in the offer, either that or I adjust the price according to the condition of the property. Now, this is important when you're writing an offer, that most people do this, and I don't know why they do it. They go in the front door, obviously, and they go all around the house, and their client loves it, and they peek in the garage, and then they, go to their car and they write the offer up at the office or whatever they do. You need to go around the house. You need to go out the back door and walk around the house, because you need to see if there's any issues out there. Damaged soffit or fascia, damaged siding, broken windows, sinkhole in the backyard, sewage boiling up out of the ground, whatever it might be, you need to actually look. You're writing a government loan, let's say it's an older house, and the house is immaculate, it's got new siding, blah, 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 blah. And then you walk outside and the garage is basically leaning like this and the paint's all chipping off. Government's not gonna loan on it. So you can ask for it in the contract, just say it up front. Seller to pay for any potential FHA or VA required repairs, such as chipping paint on the garage and broken windows and things like that. You could do that if you wanted to, but you have to understand is that, okay, it's sold in its present condition, and then you want to make adjustments, make them up front. That's where I think they should be made. Now, in that crazy market we're in for 18 months, nah, you're not getting anything. If it's 150, you better pay 150 plus, 200, 200 plus. Now we're come back down to almost normal, and we will get there eventually where you actually negotiate on properties, which would be nice. Okay, on property data, write down there on your paper, right on the contract, buyer's remorse paragraph, right there by B. Buyer's remorse paragraph. So you can see on the offer received, they put no days. They're not going to review anything. But this is a data review period that's available to buyers. And it says, here's some of the things you can do: zoning regulations, taxes, school districts, square footage of the land or improvements, presence of registered sex offenders or other convicted criminals in the area. Okay, that's just some examples, but you can do anything else you want to too. So where it says the 5 if none stated, if the buyer at any time during 5 days says, you know what, I've reviewed the data and I'm not going to buy the house, they walk away. They can terminate it without penalty. Paint colors, they bring their mother-in-law over and she hates the house. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be something real, like they found out it wasn't in Kickapoo schools and they wanted to be there, or Glendale or Central or wherever it is. It could be something real like that. More times it's not, it is not that. It's just, they've just changed their mind. And when we have a lot of inventory in the market, people use this like a gun. They'll make the offer of 5 days for a review, or 10 even, and be like, no, I'm countering this. Or I immediately call the agent and say, I love your offer, it's great, but you've got to put 0 on 144 or we're not looking at your offer. We've got other offers, or, you know, we just can't do that. I can't allow them to sit there for 5 days and then you terminate the contract at midnight. And again, even though it gives these examples, that's not it. It's anything. On C, on inspection reports, here's what's funny. The buyer can do his own inspections and do his own surveys and write his own report. Or he can hire you, or me to do his inspections. It's anybody that he feels is qualified. It used to say they had to be a licensed, business license, have a business license, but they took that out. So just remember, eventually you're gonna have a buyer down the lane somewhere who thinks he's really smart and says, I wanna do my own inspections. Or I'm gonna have my dad do the inspections. That's a bad one. Or my grandpa's been in the construction business for 60 years. I'm gonna have him do the inspection. Okay, that's what you say. You don't say, nah, it's kind of a bad idea. You know, just say, okay, because they're allowed to do that. All right? You have to inform the other agent because they don't have access to the property and you'll have to be there during the inspection. Now, whoever that buyer's inspector is, then has to send over a report in writing. And it can be, I've seen them on just notebook paper, you know, with a few pictures through text or something like that. But it won't be a 45-page report or 50-page report. And since, are you fairly new, you said, right? Most of you guys are, so let's look. I don't know if I can do that or not. Yeah, I can. There we go. Well, there's an inspection notice. I wanted to get your report. Let me go out of this one real quick. I don't know where it is. Is that it? No. There we go. There's one right there. So here's an inspection report from D2. And if we're going to print this thing, it's probably 40 pages. It could be 60. It's got gobbledygook for about 5 pages. And then it starts. And so the inspectors are they're very thorough. They'll walk the roof. They should crawl in the crawl space. They'll crawl in the attic. They plug in and plug out and flush toilets and fill things. They check. This guy uses, I think he's the one that uses an infrared camera. Let's see if this is him. Cracks me up. Scares me too. If the plumber was still here, let's see here. I'm pretty sure this is the guy that does that. There it is. Infrared. Pretty cool, actually. But at the same time, I'm like, you know, when you see that, you go, oh, God, you know. Because he also uses that type of deal on leaks. Anyhow, you'll see we are on, I don't know what page this is. This is 17, and you can see where I'm at on the screen. It's probably 60 pages. So from that 60 pages of inspection notice, then you'll see our inspection report. There's the inspection notice. And see how this was written. It's fairly simple. Seller to repair a hole in siding. That's just from weed eaters or rocks or whatever. Seller to secure a dryer vent because it's loose. Seller to repair or replace primary bathroom window per inspection report. Now, if I'm writing that, I'm going to say seller to have qualified contractor I don't have to have a window specialist, but I want a qualified contractor to repair it. I don't want the homeowner doing it, unless he's a contractor. Seller to repair or replace downstairs bathroom vent fan, I'm going to say seller to have a qualified contractor do that. And then seller to extend and bury ground drain lines to prevent water intrusion in basement per inspection report. I don't care, the seller can do that, right? You can dig a hole and stick them down in the ground. And then I'm gonna have my inspector go back and look at it before closing. Buyer's gonna have to pay extra money to get that done, but at the same time, I prefer that. Oop, there it was. I passed it, didn't I? That's where we were. Go back. And we were at page 3, right? Inspection reports, inspection notice. So here's the deal. On this, you look, and they've got 15 days for the inspection notice. Never go less than 15 days. Because especially if you're going to have a septic or a well test that has to be done. But it just sometimes takes that long. When the market's fairly busy or you're a new agent, you're not going to get the same response from an inspector that you are. So that on mine is on line 160. It says buyer must furnish a copy of the relevant portions of the inspection report. I never send them the relevant portions. I send them the entire report. I want them to see all of it, 62 pages. Because I want them to see, look, we're asking for 5 things, not 62 pages of stuff. But never put less than 15 in there because you've got to protect your buyer because number 1, you've got to have the inspection. Number 2, you've got to review the inspection with your buyer client. Number 3, you've got to write an inspection notice and send it. And so you don't want to miss that because if you do, really as a buyer's agent, you're become responsible for that. Now, if it needs a new roof, that's a big responsibility. Okay? And if you miss that 15-day mark, if you go outside of that 15-day mark without asking for an additional 5 days, which you can, I guarantee the other agent's going to go, sorry, we'd like to help you, but it's not how it's going to go. Okay, now, what kind of inspections can you do? The buyer, anything. It's kind of a reminder. You can do any inspection that you want to do. It doesn't have to be related just to mechanical structural. It can be foundation, it can be radon, it can be anything. So if your buyer says they want to do it, then you do it. You just make sure you get an inspector that can do most of it at the same time. They're always going to require a termite report. They're always going to require a termite report at the very least. So you want to make sure that your inspector does that. It's better if it's free. And most of the inspectors include that as free. Okay. So, but when your client sits down and says, okay, hey, we're under contract, yippee doodle. All right. Now we have to select an inspector. Who would you like to inspect the property? Who?
Anybody, right?
Well, yeah, we've got a list, but it's not very comprehensive. And they actually have to sign that list saying they've looked at it. But they're probably going to ask your advice. And you're never going to tell them just one name, just like the plumber's husband. You're not just going to give them one name. You're going to give them multiple choices. But they may still come to you and say, okay, who would you prefer? Or who have you had? A lot of times, let's say, we've had success with these inspectors. So it's up to you. But Mr. Buyer, if you want to go home tonight and call these 2 companies and see if you can get some information on them, check on their prices, check on what they do, you go right ahead. But I need to know an answer by tomorrow. Now, I prefer to give me an answer right then because as soon as they leave the room, I'm dialing that inspector and trying to set up the inspection. Because the earlier you get it done, if there's roof issues, foundation issues, plumbing issues, whatever it might be, then you've got more time to work actually on the transaction and get it done. Okay, now you only get one notice. It says it in bold to make sure you understand that. So if you're doing a house in the country with a septic and a well, and then you're doing a mechanical structural inspection too, you've got to get all three of those reports back before you can fill out the notice. You only get one shot. You can't wait 10 days for the septic guy to get out there. That's why I say minimum of 15. And then if you need more time, you just send an email or a notice to the seller's agent saying, I need 5 more days as a minimum. And then you got 20 days. So hopefully you can get it all done in that amount of time. Okay. Then on this next part, it says if an inspection notice is timely given. So my buyer has had an inspection. I've sent the notice over. It says, number one, buyer is satisfied with all inspections. Probably not going to happen. There are unacceptable conditions to be satisfied by a seller in a workmanlike manner. Notice it doesn't say in a professional manner. It says a workmanlike manner prior to scheduled closing date unless otherwise specified, or the buyer elects to terminate the contract. Now, I'm not accepting a contract from anybody. You guys can write them all day long, unless that box is checked right there, which says, look, I'm waiving my right as a buyer to just terminate the contract after the inspection. What I want is I want the seller to have an opportunity to fix these things that I found, just like an inspection notice that I sent. It's not that in that inspection notice, there's probably $150, maybe $200 worth of repairs. I'm not going to terminate a contract over that. But if this box is not checked, it doesn't matter what's in the inspection report. They can walk away. So as a buyer's agent, I'm suggesting to you that you tell your client, the contract is supposed to be fair and balanced. It's supposed to be, for the seller and for the buyer. Seller wants to sell, buyer wants to buy. But if the buyer can walk away after an inspection, I don't think that's a good contract. So I always counter those. I never accept them. But you guys can do what you want to. But if you put 5 in the data period, the buyer remorse paragraph, and don't check that box in the market that we did have, your contract would not be accepted, pretty much. All right, now, once we send over the notice, so you saw the notice there, right? And you've got a copy of an inspection notice there. But once we send it over, then the seller has 10 days to accept that in writing, to counter it, to reach an agreement. The seller and buyer must reach an agreement within 10 days in writing. So by midnight on the 10th day, if you don't have a written agreement, I've asked for these 5 things. The seller has decided to only fix 3. We haven't negotiated anymore. And it gets to midnight on the 10th day, the contract terminates. It's done. So if you represent a seller, be talking to the seller and say, look, we don't have a response back from the buyer. What do you want to do? The seller can go back in then and say, look, I'll fix everything. Just send it over. Okay. But your buyer, if they want out of the contract and they ask for 5 things and the seller said 3, you just stay mute. You stay quiet on it until midnight on the 10th day, and the contract terminates. They're out of the contract. They don't have any more legal responsibility to the seller. Okay. That's what that contract says. That's what's called the resolution period, to resolve this deal. I'm not going to have that. Capitulation, you can read about that, but we're going a little long, so I don't want to get into that too much. It just says basically if the seller doesn't make a response at all or says I'm not going to fix anything, then the buyer can terminate the contract in 2 days. And it just lets the seller get back on the market and lets the buyer get back on the market too. All right, now it starts going fast. We do not have municipal and government inspections in Springfield, Nixa, Ozark, any of the surrounding towns, except Lebanon. Lebanon's the only one that does one. And they charge $10, so you don't have to worry about that at all. On G, we're all on the next page now, hopefully. Page 4, I guess. Broker roll all the way down from 202 to 221. you don't have any responsibility. Unless you hire the person and pay them to, whether it be an engineer or an inspector, I mean, if you actually hire and pay them, then you have responsibility. But if you're just engage them to do the job for the buyer, there's nothing on you. So it doesn't matter what they do or say, you don't have any liability. And if you look at 214, it says, under Missouri law, brokers are immune from liability for statements made by all of these people. So you don't have to worry about what they do. Now, you get a crappy inspector and he goes to the seller or the buyer and says, man, I wouldn't buy this house if it's the last house on earth, which has happened in our company, then I would be worried about that guy. Number one, I'd never use him again, or girl. But also I'd be worried about the liability from the seller, because that's what's called tortious interference in a contract. You don't want that. Okay, and home warranties, have you been introduced yet to HSA and OCHASA? Generally, yeah. They should have classes. They used to have classes all the time. And the HSA, when the pandemic hit, everybody quit coming around. And HSA kind of went by the way. And then George Brockman took over for OCHASA. He used to be an HSA guy, and he doesn't come around much either, or try to sell them. But it's really not a bad idea for your client to ask for a home warranty in a different market than we had. So we're entering into a market now where you could ask for a home warranty, because it does cover the appliances. It doesn't cover everything. It won't replace a roof. It won't replace all the plumbing, but it does cover appliances, washer, dryer, a dishwasher, range, refrigerator, garbage disposal. Those things are covered. So I would generally not be afraid to ask for a home warranty.
What about like AC and heating?
Who?
Does it cover, like AC and heating, does it cover that? Like air
Yes.
conditioning?
HVAC is covered. That doesn't cover it again 100%. But let's say you move in and you've got an OCHASA, whatever that is, warranty. And so you call them, you're 15 days into the house or 20 days, nothing was mentioned on the inspection, so you didn't ask for any repairs on it, but the furnace goes out. So you call them, you pay the $100 fee for them to come out. You can call your own people. They come out and look at it and go, yeah, it's shot. We need a new furnace. It's going to be $4,800, just the furnace section. And so you turn that into OCHASA, and OCHASA says, you know what? The house is 20 years old. We'll pay half. That's a good deal. I'd take that. So it's not a bad idea. Now you notice here, buyer acknowledges on our contract that the seller's not providing one. Our seller was kind of difficult on this one. But anyhow, she didn't provide one. Or then on number 2, seller agrees to pay, but only at and upon closing for the cost of a home warranty. So you could ask for one, and then the seller agrees to it if they don't counter this. And then 3, you already have a home warranty in place. Now, if you look at Evan DeShawn's contracts, a lot of his, we already have a home warranty in place. And that to me makes it more valuable, a little bit of peace of mind. Here's what you're gonna find as buyer's agents. You sell a house, 2 weeks later, something goes wrong, they're probably calling you first. And you have to tell them, say, I'm a realtor, I fill out contracts, but I didn't inspect the house. And call the inspection company if you've got an issue with that. And if you got a home warranty, just call OCHASA, then bring them out. And then it's all on their backs and not on yours anymore. But you don't want that. You don't want people calling you about stuff that you can't control. We already talked about paragraph 8 on the earnest money, right? So we're not talking about that again. On paragraph 9, we have tornadoes, we have fires, we have straight line winds, some flooding, where a house can be, either completely destroyed or condemned because of that kind of damage. If that's the case, the buyer can take the insurance proceeds in the amount of the contract if they want to. Or the seller and the buyer can agree that the seller will bring the house back to the condition it was when they wrote the contract. Or the buyer and seller can agree to just terminate the contract, which is what happens most of the time. On 10, we start talking about closing costs. Now, you guys spend a lot of time in school talking about closing costs, prorate this, prorate that, and all that stuff. You don't have to do any of that. The title company does all of that. And I'll tell you what, if I put $3,000 in concessions in that front line on page 1 of the contract for the buyer, The lender's gonna try to take all $3,000. What the bottom line on this is that the lender's gonna decide what can be taken other than typical costs. So you're gonna prorate, if you're the seller, you're gonna prorate your taxes and receive a credit at closing. And then the buyer is gonna receive a debit, and then they're gonna be responsible in November, December to pay the property taxes. But that's not your job, okay? The title company's gonna do that. And then as far as interest and prepaying interest and all that, that's not your job. That's the title company's job. Escrows, that's not your job. That's the title company's job. So if you go all the way down to, on my page, on this page on the screen, it's line 300. Any other expenses and fees associated with the closing, all as approved by buyer's lender. That's what the concessions are. All as approved by buyer's lender, because they get to approve any concessions that come out. Now, home warranty, paid by the seller completely. Title fees, they pay their own title fees, the seller does, the buyer pays part of these concessions maybe. And you can't charge, if you're a buyer's agent, you can't charge the seller for your buyer's agent fees if you have a flat fee, 150, 250, 350, whatever that might be. Okay, so that was half of the page. That it all depends on who? I want you to say it. The lender. Line 300. All is approved by buyer's lender. Any seller concessions, any buyer concession, anything that's given out, the lender is going to do it. And we think we're going all the way to closing. Who's the last guy gets to approve everything? The lender. It's the lender. So hopefully you're working with a good one and they know what they're doing. On 11, this is a binding contract. Look, you just need to know, binding contract. That's what a contract is. If you have two parties agree to it, it's binding under state and federal law. They just need to know that. It's assignable. We can take this offer for $575 that got accepted, and what we can do is assign that. So let's say I was buying this house for $575 and oops, I can't buy it anymore because I'm moving out of town. So I assign it to you. You get to buy this house because you want to buy it. You said, man, I wish I could buy that house. So guess what? You get to buy it. You just have to agree to the terms and conditions that I've got, at least. You can do better. You can pay cash if you wanted to. But in this case, you're just going to buy it. You're going to get a loan of 85%, not to exceed 6%, and so on. That's perfectly okay. It takes one document, just an amendment. All parties agree that the buyer will now be, what's your name?
Christina.
Christina. And Christina signs, and I sign, the seller signs. It's done. Now it's Christina's house. It's that simple. Pretty cool. Congratulations.
Thank you.
1031 exchange, you're not going to be dealing much with this unless you're dealing with commercial property or multifamily or investment property. But if you do, it's above your pay grade. So what you should do is call a broker and ask for advice. The broker's probably going to send you to a specific title company to say, talk to the title company. And then we're going to tell you, you should advise your client to talk to their CPA. Because we don't, 1031 exchange is how you defer taxes into the future. And that's not our job. We do it all the time, and we can write a contract. Let's say you've got a duplex that you want to sell, and you go under contract and say, God, I don't want to pay the capital gains on that. What is that? I paid $100,000 for the duplex. I'm selling it for $200,000. So my capital gains is $100,000. Tax on that is 21%, which is $21,000. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to take this money and buy something else anyway. You do a 1031 exchange, you take that money and you buy a fourplex. Okay? And then you don't have to pay any of those taxes. No capital gains whatsoever. But if you get to that point, then call me and I'll direct you to the right people, or I'll walk you through it. On the next page, on paragraph 12, the entire agreement modification said the contract and any rider or attachment hereto constitute the entire agreement because the parties hereto, between the parties hereto concerning the property. There are no other understandings, written or oral, related to the subject matter. Contract may not be changed, modified, or amended in whole or in part except in writing signed by all parties. So you can't go back in and say, you know what? I know you made this offer, but I'm gonna change the box on 174 to an X. No, if it's signed, you can't modify it without an amendment. Okay, simple as that, straightforward. Just remember that. And then if you ever, the attorneys like to say the contract is the four corners of the contract, the 8 pages. It's not. When we refer to a contract, we're referring to the contract, addendums, inspection notices, everything becomes a part of the contract at some point. All right, default. If you read these paragraphs right here, 13A and B, they're exactly the same, but one starts if seller defaults, buyer may, if buyer defaults, seller may. Look, we don't want anybody to default. Default means I've entered into a contract supposedly in good faith, and now I'm not going to close. I'm the buyer. And you say to me, Christine, you say, you know what, Jim, you need to read paragraph 13 because there's 3 options in there and none of them are good. The first one is the seller can specifically enforce the contract. In other words, they can make you buy the property. And, you know, I hate to tell you this, but it's going to be really expensive because you're going to have an attorney and they're going to have to pay an attorney, and you may have to pay their attorney fees if you lose. Secondly, they can just enforce the contract, or just say that I'm just going to get paid. The seller can go to you and say, you defaulted, so I want all actual damages that occurred. I had to move out of the house. I had to make these thousands of dollars in repairs. I'm having to rent a property now. My house has been off the market for 60 days. You know, I've been damaged. Here's how much I've been damaged. You pay me that, I'll let you walk away. Third, my favorite, any remedy under the law. You know what that means? Any remedy under the law. That's what it means. So, oh, I had to see a psychiatrist because of this. Anything. I had a heart attack. I got stressed out and had to get up. I mean, whatever. Including specific performance and damages. So you don't want that. So when a buyer, and I've had this happen to me before, a buyer say, I ain't closing, man. That's just it. I ain't closing. You know, I'm tired of this stuff. I go, you know, bad idea. First of all, your loan's been approved, the inspection's done, we made repairs. I said, you really shouldn't do that. It's going to be costly to you. You need to read paragraph 13, and you really need to talk to an attorney. But here's my suggestion to you. We close on the property. I don't care if you ever move in. Care less one way or the other. And I'll put it back on the market that day, and I won't charge you anything on the list side of the property. You have to pay 3% to a buyer's agent if there's one, but you don't have to pay me anything on the list side. So the house has already got a new roof. You know, it's been cleaned up. The market's a little stronger now. I might be able to get you 3% more for the house. So, you know, we're closing at 200. Let's list it for 206 and see if we can get you out of there at no cost. But I guarantee it's going to cost you more than that if you get an attorney. So default's a bad idea. I'm suggesting you talk to an attorney, but a better option might be just let me, you close, you're already approved for a loan. I'll sell it. We'll get it done quickly and you'll be out of here. If they don't want to do that, that's fine. Go see the attorney. I'm done. You know, I'll provide all the documents to the attorney, but I'm not counseling this buyer and saying, okay, here's how we get out of the contract, which is what a lot of agents do, which is stupid. Our job is to put people into contracts, not to get them out. And it's the same on either paragraph. So the seller does the same thing, you tell them the same thing. Except that you don't tell them I'm gonna buy the house, you're just gonna say, you need to close. It'd be a lot less expensive for you. Skip 14 because it doesn't always apply in the state of Missouri. And then on 15, seller's disclosure statement. Your seller should fill out a disclosure statement. What kills me most is when an investor buys a house, rips every piece of drywall out of the house, rewires the house, replumbs the house, puts up new drywall, paint, light fixtures, garage door openers, paints the front door, puts in all new windows, puts on a new roof, and then says they don't know anything about the house. Because that's a blank you can check. Says because of limited knowledge. That didn't mean limited knowledge. You know, you've seen the house inside out. I just think that's bogus. I would suggest to you, if you work with an investor and he tries to pull that and say, look, man, at least address the things that you did. You don't have to do anything with anything you don't know, but at least do the things. And I always tell my sellers, I suggest, even though it's voluntary in the state of Missouri, that you answer the questions to your best of your ability. And if you don't know an answer, put unknown. Simple enough. But they should. I mean, think about it. You live in your house, right? You're the seller. You know more about it than anybody else. So voluntarily make those disclosures. People are always afraid that people are going to come back on them. I had an attorney that I work with on a regular basis. And she was going to sell her house. And she said, I'm not making any disclosures. I mean, it just blew me away because she's actually a good attorney. And she said, if I don't have to, I'm not going to. You know, they can just bring it, they can hold it against me. Well, that's an attorney mind, right? You know, somebody's going to look for some reason to sue. Don't think like that. Think like a good person. Think that, you know what, I'm honestly telling the buyer what I know, and then the buyer's going to do an inspection too. Don't hide anything for sure. All right, so in this one, we did have a buyer, or the disclosures filled out by the seller. The buyer confirmed that they read it, okay? Look at 348, this is a scary one. So you list a house, you're not a buyer's agent now, but you've got a house listed and you don't have a disclosure statement on the MLS. Even if it says, I'm not disclosing anything, you don't have one. Now, the buyer would check box B and say, the seller agrees to provide me with a seller's disclosure statement within 1 day, if none stated, after the effective date. And then I get 3 days to review it, and I can decide whether to go forward or terminate. So it's just like that buyer's remorse paragraph over there. How would you like to go to your seller and say, oh, Mr. Seller, I forgot, put the disclosure on the MLS, so they've terminated the contract. That's some liability there, isn't it? Man. So if you get a listing, what should you do?
Make sure you fill out the seller's disclosure.
Put the disclosures in, put them online. Not only fill them out, put them online. If you have to, I guess worst case scenario, you can make a copy of it and put it in the house. I think that would cover you a little bit, not much, but it cover you, depending on how many showings you have. And then see, it says no seller's disclosure statement will be provided. Well, that can actually happen, right? Except for page 1, which says you've got to, by law, say whether there was methamphetamines made here, whether there was a dump site, whether it's hazardous materials or lead-based paint. Those 4 items have to be done. So even though you don't make any other disclosures, you've got to at least make those disclosures. Lead-based paint is required by law. It says if required by law. It's a federal law, right? Yeah. 17, walkthrough, verification of condition. All this means is you get to do a walkthrough. It's best to do it if the house is vacant prior to closing. It'd be nice if you could do it 4 days or so before closing in case there's some issues there. But you don't always get to do that because a lot of times the house is still occupied. But you need to do one. And we actually require that as a part of your closing documents, unless your buyer just says, no, I don't want to do it. When you turn in your contract, it'll say, where's the walkthrough form when you're about to get paid. So you'd like to do one. Now, if you run into a problem, you immediately take a picture of whatever the problem is. You text that to the other agent. You say, we got a problem, let's talk, and then you call them. And you need to either have compensation, return to the refrigerator, or we may need an amendment or something to take care of those things. On signatures, just know that the contract can be executed in multiple counterparts, which means you can wet sign it, and he can electronically sign it, and he can electronically sign it, and that's okay. They can all be signed that way. It doesn't matter. On governing law and construction, a seller could be 15 people and a buyer could be 14 people in the contract. And with what we have now is a lot of baby boomers are dying and kids are inheriting the property. So let's say you got 3 sons and they're all married. Now you got 6 sellers. So seller might refer to 6 people. We've got a contract right now with some people from Florida. They're buying Willow Springs. There's 8 people, 3 different families. So we have to get 8 signatures, 8 initials on everything that we do. Notices, bottom line on notices. You're getting close to the end of the contract now. You're getting excited, aren't you? You better not do that name polish for me. Anything you do, we saw it earlier in the contract, do it in writing. No handshakes, hugs, or kisses. I don't care if the guy's your best friend or the girl's your best friend or you guys are sisters. You need to put it in writing because if you don't, it does not exist and it can't be enforced. And what you'll notice is, so you write an offer and you get your signature, buyer's signature, and you scan it and you push send, and it goes, it's there. It's been received by the listing agent / seller, whether he's seen it or not, it's been received. And so that's the same thing on a counter. So you write an offer, it's not accepted, he counters you. And then you sign the counter and you send it over. As soon as you send it, it's received. Whether he's seen it or not, it's there. Now, you write an offer, he counters, you get your client to handwrite and sign or electronically sign, and you don't send it, then that counter does not exist. And we've seen that happen too, where agents get, their clients lose their property because the agent went to dinner that evening, got up the next day, went to church, went to lunch after church, and that afternoon, mid-afternoon, sent a counter offer that they had signed at noon the next day or the day before. And the other agent already had another offer that had been accepted. That didn't exist. I know. And then she had to go back to her buyer and say, sorry, my fault. And then she said that we were unethical for accepting the other offer, we, the company. Paragraph 20, it's right there. If we don't receive it, it doesn't exist. And you can call me on the telephone and say, hey, I've got a signed offer. And then my response should be, send it over. That's what it should be. Because if I don't get it, my seller has every right in the world to accept another offer. Or what else could they do if I don't get it?
Compensation or?
Terminate the contract or terminate the counteroffer by rescinding the counteroffer. And they say, well, we've already got it signed, and say, I don't have a copy of it. I'm withdrawing that counteroffer prior to receiving it with a signature. Anytime. All right, on riders, we saw some that we have to have. If it's any government loan, we're going to have to, whatever, USDA, VA, it's going to have that rider. Second column over, 391, 392, the contingency for the sale of buyer's existing property. That means my property is not under contract and may not even be on the market, but it's contingent on that. And then the second one is a good one, in my opinion. Contingency for closing a buyer's existing property. So my property, the buyer's property, is under contract, and it's even better if we're doing inspections. Okay? And then what other riders or notices can you use? Anything you want. That's why the other lines are there. So there's 154, I think, different contracts, notices, and riders in the MR documents, Missouri Realtor documents. You can use any of them. But they should be marked there. So, for example, 396 says this contract is designed for use in connection with completed construction. It works terribly for new construction, terribly. However, so if you write an offer on this for new construction, then you probably ought to put a rider in there on 394 that says buyer and seller or buyer will meet with the builder within 7 days to make all choices available to the buyer. That'd be simple enough. Or you could just have a list. And sometimes the broker or the builder will have a list that says, here's everything: roof, post, flooring, light fixtures, on and on and on and on. And it's a checkbox, but you need to meet with the builder, and the builder and the buyer need to initial that list. So you don't show up and you've got a pink sink and white carpet, because they can do that if you don't have an agreement as to what it should be. That's why this contract doesn't work very good, and you need to have a rider. Now, some builders have their own contract. That's fine. Trendsetter is one of them. That's fine. But you can start with this contract, and then they may say, you know, we want you to write the contract on our contract. Fine, we'll write it on that contract. But at some point, I'm just warning you, you need to have a list of items that the buyer selects, and the builder and the buyer both initial and date. So we're all in agreement on that. Okay? And then special agreements. This is for anything else you want to write in there. Seller agrees to remove all trash from the property prior to closing. Seller agrees to remove all personal property from the property prior to closing. Seller agrees to fill in the hole in the backyard that the dogs dug and reseed prior to closing. Seller agrees to replace the roof prior to closing. Seller agrees to replace the broken window in the dining room prior to closing. You can put anything you want to in there. It could even be a contingency. Purchase is contingent on the buyer signing a contract with Springfield Public Schools prior to August 1st. Right? Seller agrees or purchase or contract is contingent on buyer signing a contract with Springfield or Greene County 911 prior to closing. It could all be right there, you know? And so that contingency exists until it's removed. And if you go past August 1st as the date that we use, then the contract would terminate of its own language. Now, if you buy something for yourself to live in or to rehab or whatever it might be, you need to fill out this, whatever applies. You're either a party to the transaction. A principal means you're one of the owners of it, or you're working with an immediate family member. So I've worked with my niece before, and I put that down there, that I had an immediate family member of the buyer, and she was my niece. Your broker compensation is typically going to come from the seller right now. But if you have an agreement with the buyer that they're going to pay you a fee at closing, such as a buyer's fee, a buyer's admin fee, a buyer's agency fee, whatever it might be, and that's perfectly legal, and you've told them up front that if you're going to work with me, you're going to pay me this fee, then you'd also mark the box buyer, because you're going to get compensation on the closing statement for both the seller and the buyer. Now, there's nothing wrong with that fee. And when you go to the classes, hopefully somebody will talk about it more in depth, but let's say last 12 months ago, a buyer's agent's showing 13 properties and writing offers on 11 of them over the course of 3 months, and none of them go through. And you receive no compensation. That's a bad deal. I mean, at least if you got $250 or $450, whatever, it would help cover the cost of your gas. Like the buyer's specialist that I work with in my office, who does a little admin too, she went and showed property in Willow Springs, Mountain Grove, Hartville, and Lebanon all in one day. I know. I mean, $450,000 buyer, but at the same time, they wrote an offer, it didn't get accepted, you know? And so she made no money, and they won't be back in town for another 6 months or something. So, you know, sometimes it's okay that you get compensated. So the choice when you write the buyer's agency contract is they pay you right then for your services, or they pay you at closing. If they pay you at closing, then you've got to have that box checked, okay? Missouri law requires that you give a broker disclosure form to the buyer and or the seller, whoever you represent. And this says you've already done that. Now, a lot of agents are not worth a dang, and they don't even give them a Missouri broker disclosure form. It's a simple document. You've seen it, right? It's a 2-page form. And all it says is, look, here's the different agencies in the state of Missouri. And when I sit down with my clients, like yesterday, we listed a property, I circle. I'm going to be working for you as a seller's limited agent. Now, the brokerage as a whole represents you, but I individually am representing you. And then down here, I'm going to be a designated agent. So that just means that I and my group that I work with, we're the only ones in the company that represent you specifically on this contract. Now, all the other agents are trying to sell your property, and they're representing, you know, the property from the brokerage standpoint, but I am your agent, your designated agent. And so when you list something, or when you write a buyer's agency contract, you're going to see in there who's the designated agent. You put down Christine, and then you send that to me for signature, because I'm assigning you as the only agent to represent that client. And like Vera's network, I got 14 names on there. And I sign it and say, all these people work for you. And then on the box down there, so we're talking mostly from a buyer's standpoint today, you would check the box that you're a buyer's limited agent, and you're also a designated agent on 427. Okay? So the buyer here is House Theory Realty, is the brokerage, And you'll notice they've got their NERDS number, and they've got their broker's license number, and then Emily's also got her licensee state license number. And notice, I told you at the very beginning, this is a good agent. She writes a good, strong contract because she had the full name of everybody. You knew it right off the bat that she's gonna be pretty detailed. And then she even went in when they made the offer and she put my agent's name here and brokerage and NERDS number, filled it all in for them, which is a smart deal to do because then you don't get it back after compliance. And you can see my agent hadn't signed anything. Done by. 26 on the next page. We are a franchise. On 27, all sales information, we're going to send it to the MLS to try to create market value. We got to understand, if a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, 1,400 square foot house in Republic is selling for $220, and then we want to list one, and we see that there's been 5 selling the last month between $200 and $230, and we're listing one that's just like it. We want to know where the value is. We don't want to put it at $240, and we don't want to put it at $190. $190 costs the seller's money, $240 might cost them a sale. So you want to know what the market is. I love this next one. FERPTA and anti-terrorism, same thing. We're not going to do crap with this. We're going to send it to the title company, and the title company is going to look at everything and say, okay, we'll look and see if they're on the anti-terrorist list. We're not doing that. That's not our job. I don't care if the guy's name is Osama bin Laden. It's not our job, okay? I recognize him in a picture, I guess if he did. Point is that we don't do that. Now, if you get some inky feelings about it, you talk to the title company. You say, no, I'm a little concerned about this. Now, can a Chinese national buy property in the United States? Yeah. Can an immigrant, a Mexican immigrant, buy property in the United States? Yeah. Got to have a green card probably, but yes. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. There's some limits to it, I guess. I think it's like, I don't know, it's a percentage that they can own in one state, but we hardly ever reach that limit. On 30, when you're writing an offer now, you probably can go 24 hours with the offer to see what's going on. For a while there, we had to put 2 hours in there, to make sure that they made a decision quickly, the seller, but probably 24 hours is okay on an occupied home. If it's an occupied home and it's not a crazy market, but a pretty warm market, and I like to get it done quickly, like 12, 18 hours if I could. So I show the property at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the entire family has to leave. And I might put it expiring my offer at 10 a.m. the next morning. If I can get it there that night and get it signed by everybody. Because they're selling their house, they want to sell, I'm making a good offer, and they're in town. I know they're in town. Vacant house, you got a whole lot of other questions to ask, how long is it going to take to get a response and so on. Now, if you deal with foreclosures, which is going to happen again in the future, hopefully not as many as we used to have, but some, there's no reason to put a deadline in there because they don't care. They'll do whatever they want to, the asset managers. On the time is of the essence, the last paragraph of this contract, this really refers to the fact that you've got responsibilities, the buyer's got responsibilities, the seller's got responsibilities, and they're all in 24-hour periods. So if I write this offer and it gets accepted today, and then I've got 10 days for inspections, then today is the second. So I start counting on day 3, 24 hours. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right? That's the 10th day is the 12th. So I count in 24-hour segments, but I don't count by time. So if I sign it at 5 o'clock, it's not 10 days and until 5 o'clock. It's a 24-hour period all the way to midnight. Everything in the contract. So if you put in there, you've got 30 days for the loan contingency deadline, it's 30 24-hour days. It's not 30 days and 5 o'clock. If you're supposed to close on the 2nd of August and you put in there closing at 5 o'clock on the 2nd of August, it can close anytime up to midnight because it's all 24-hour segments. And you can see here, woo, 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 it got signed and accepted. The buyers, Michael Spencer and Brandy Lee Harris and Oma Melinda Cooper, all signed, and so we're going to closing. 26th of August, right? Questions? Those other two documents, one you got is inspection notice, right?
Right.
And the other one is the as-is inspection waiver. Here's the deal, on the as-is rider, you should use 2 or 3 on those paragraphs. This came about because agents were